My original title for this video was The AHL Pipeline, the Code and the Cost of Goonery. Everyone's been banging on about boo-hoo-hoo. Poor top NHL players might not be able to get more than 12.5 million US a year anymore because Connor McDavid only accepted 12.5 million AAV in his last contract extension. I mean, come on. Boo-hoo. Star player making millions might be constrained in his ability to make even more millions. McDavid himself said that his dog Lenny wasn't going to go hungry anytime soon. And believe me, none of these star NHL players are going to go hungry either, unless they make poor financial planning and asset protection decisions and blow all of their money, leaving them with nothing post-retirement. But that's a different issue. The thing that really got me about all of this discourse was that no one, and I mean no one, seems to give a single crap about what seems to be a pretty significant abuse of the employer-employee power dynamic by NHL teams when they use players from the minors. The American Hockey League, the AHL, is officially chartered as the NHL's primary developmental league, focused on developing players, refining skills, and ensuring a seamless transition for promising prospects to the top tier. However, events like the recent Panthers Lightning game have demonstrated to me that the functional relationship between NHL parent clubs and their AHL affiliates is frequently exploited. This system allows teams to warehouse lower skilled but higher physicality specialists in the minors, enabling their deployment for short-term tactical violence upon command. The controversial preseason games between the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning attracted a lot of debate and criticism. It was a textbook case of identity politics, which, if you think about it, was basically modelled on sporting and tribal loyalties in the first place. People lining up and opining based purely on which team they support, and being extremely blind and one-eyed about the other side. Panther fans said that the Lightning are bad. They didn't come to play hockey. They had bad intentions. Lightning fans said that the Panthers started it because they play dirty and they are villains. They're also banging on about the old boy network in the NHL, unfair punishment, and criticising the NHL for not going hard enough on the Panthers. I'm not going to go into that. Even worse, people are blaming the Lightning players who initiated the fights. So I'm putting Lightning in inverted commas here. But sorry, mate. I blame the team and the structure that enabled this debacle to take place, and not those individual players who were called up by the team from their affiliate minors. Why is no one talking about this? I don't see anyone talking about the fact that this game highlighted a structural manipulation, revealing a calculated approach to using the AHL system as a pipeline for operationalizing strategic retaliation. For me, this practice raises severe ethical concerns regarding player contractual leverage, financial precarity, and the long-term integrity of player development. As you know, by the way, for the record, in terms of my standing to opine on this issue, I got none. I am not a hockey expert in any way. I got into this because I already had a passing interest in hockey from when I was a kid. Lately, I've been writing a really ridiculous hockey romance because I extremely dislike a lot of the current hockey romances that are out right now. This led me down a rabbit hole, watching, reading, and learning a lot more about the NHL than I ever planned to. I would say that in recent days, I've probably studied more about the NHL and sort of things behind the scenes than I have actually watching games, which is a bit weird. After the recent Panthers Lightning preseason game or debacle, my brain started exploding with questions. So let's have some background about this particular incident. On the 4th of October 2025, the Tampa Bay Lightning recalled 6 players from their AHL affiliate, the Syracuse Crunch, for the final preseason game against the Florida Panthers. Generally, a preseason game, as far as I understand it, is not quite an exhibition game, but it's almost like a warm-up game in which the teams are basically allowing their players to kind of skill up, warm up a bit, and also allow them to select who they might want for the roster for the season. Yes, they're supposed to play hard, but it's not one of those situations where the outcome of the games really matters. And I think it's supposed to allow them to be a little bit more experimental, take a few more chances, but not really try to kill the other side. Amongst the 6 recalled players was a player named Scott Sabourin. He was singled out in media reports as a bruiser, part of a lineup described as being assembled to deliver frontier justice for an earlier cheap shot by Florida's A.J. Greer on Tampa's Brandon Hagel. There was a bit of back and forth on this, so my understanding is that Hagel had also done some things earlier, and therefore this was sort of the latest in a series of wrongs that had been committed. The result of this was over 300 penalty minutes, 16 ejections, and one pre-season game that looked more like a street brawl than hockey. You will hear a lot of people talking about the code. This is an unwritten hockey rule that says that players have to protect teammates, who are their brothers, and answer violence with violence. I'll go into that a little bit more later. A lot of people are debating whether fighting still belongs in the sport and whether the role of the enforcer should be retired altogether. Again, I'll go into that a little bit more a bit later. It's not really the focus of this video though. For me, this video is about how the AHL is used and potentially misused by NHL teams and the human cost, because at its heart, these are people. These guys that are pulled up to be the hired muscle were originally the little boys who probably loved playing hockey when they were growing up, and they dreamed of making a career in the NHL doing something they loved, and these days this is what they're reduced to. First of all, let's take a look at how NHL teams currently use the AHL. The development versus the enforcer reserve. The modern NHL prioritizes speed and skill over pure physicality, and that shift has defined the AHL's current contradictory roles. Modern roster construction has been fundamentally reshaped by faster gameplay, a heightened emphasis on skill, and a deep supply of talented athletes. This shift has essentially eliminated the need for the one-dimensional enforcer-type player whose only purpose is to fight. Historical data has confirmed this trend, showing that fighting rates have declined significantly over the decades. Consequently, even players who possess a physical edge now must offer contributions beyond mere truculence to justify their presence on an NHL roster. In the salary cap era, every roster spot must contribute statistical or tactical value across a regular shift. When an enforcer is called up specifically for fighting, their time on ice becomes negligible. A player who cannot sustain a regular shift or contribute points is an economic and a tactical liability. So what's the official mandate for the AHL? It is supposed to be the development pipeline. It serves as the NHL's primary developmental system, a place to refine skills and ensure prospects transition smoothly to the big league. You'll have seen that in some cases, the NHL teams get their players from the college system, so they allow them to mature on the vine there before they pluck them. In other cases, they go into the AHL. So young players, especially high draft picks, are assigned to the AHL to gain professional experience and correct weaknesses before they graduate to the NHL. The AHL can also help players reinvent their roles. A high-scoring junior might learn to play defensively, becoming a dependable two-way forward or penalty killer. The modern NHL is so skilled that there's almost no room for a one-dimensional fighter, as I mentioned. Even fourth liners are expected to contribute in measurable ways, typically providing reliable defense and roughly 0.3 points per game, translating to roughly 24.6 points over a full 82-game schedule. The statistic I've mentioned demonstrates a required minimum threshold of offensive skill, which specialized fighters often can't meet. But I would argue that there's also a darker secondary function, which is the enforcer parking lot. Despite its official developmental purpose, the AHL also functions as a storage unit for role players. It's where the organizations stash physical specialists who can't quite keep up at NHL pace, but whose toughness still has value. These players, often career minor league fighters on two-way contracts, exist as an insurance policy. If a rivalry flares up or a team wants to send a message, they can be called up on demand. As I've mentioned, because salary cap space is tight, teams can't afford to carry players who only fight. But if you park them in the AHL, they're off the books until you need them. A player who provides 19 seconds of strategic violence per week is an unsustainable economic drain during the regular season. The team can't afford to keep him on the main roster, which is why you might find him in the AHL. I'm not saying everyone in the AHL is like a bruiser. As I've said, it has a developmental purpose, and there might be older players who can't quite cut it in the NHL anymore, and then they go to the AHL. But I definitely see from this latest incident that it also seems to be a place where you can house your bruisers. The action by the Lightning confirms to me the structural necessity of the AHL to facilitate such violence. They utilised the enforcer as an emergency measure for a premeditated, low stakes, i.e. pre-season retaliation. The tactical genius lies in keeping the player in the AHL ready to be summoned only when their niche skill is required. Like I said, I don't think this was part of the original purpose of the AHL. I think the enforcer parking lot function probably only evolved informally as a byproduct of NHL roster management. So let's dive in now and talk about this in the context of the Lightning Panthers game. That arose after a series of retaliations between both of the teams. According to hockey's unwritten code, this justifies fighting as protection or retribution. It is not written down, and every player has his own interpretation. As I've said in one of my trashy romance stories, given that this mythical code isn't actually written down anywhere and is clearly fraught with ambiguity and lacks specificity, I'm suspecting that one man's honour is another man's gooniness, and gooniness, like beauty, is clearly in the eye of the beholder. I'm not going to debate the place of the code or fighting in hockey, but I am going to make a very controversial statement here that in my view, the code is essentially hockey's form of vigilante justice. In other words, the referees enforce the hockey legal system. The teams or players then take the law into their own hands if they are not satisfied with the calls. Those who defend the code say that the refs miss things, or the penalty doesn't fit the damage. If someone cheap shots a teammate and nothing happens, then suddenly the game's wide open for more cheap shots. They argue that the code fills that gap. They say that although it is messy, it works as a form of deterrence. For me, the issue is that once vigilante justice starts, it's almost impossible to stop the escalation. There is a reason human societies move beyond blood feuds and an eye for an eye as systems of justice. They don't actually resolve anything, they just breed more violence. The Battle of Florida looked like that kind of endless payback. In fact, I think one of the wrongs was from like a year ago that they were just saving up and getting snotty about now. It wasn't just two teams seeking closure, but it was two children locked in a schoolyard loop of one-upmanship. No one wants to let the other side have the last word, and to mix metaphors, they just keep slapping each other's faces. It is a very modern reminder of why cycles of retaliation collapse under their own stupidity and never actually deliver justice. The reason I'm mentioning this is that the code likes to pretend that it's honourable, that there is etiquette. There is no sucker punches. You stop when a guy is down. You don't pick on smaller players. You don't beat up on the star player, etc. But this ignores the fact that AHL players can be misused by NHL teams or management to be so thoroughly disgusting and dishonourable that I find this defence very disingenuous. So the players could pretend that it's mutual combat and affair of honour like a duel, but I think it's more like playground rules. But it's also a lot darker than that because it's systematic and organised. For me, when you see how AHL players can be called up for something like this, the reason it is distasteful is that it is not just a spontaneous, heat-of-the-moment escalation, but rather a calculated, organised strategy for intimidation. It also jars because hockey players like banging on about the brotherhood and loyalty in the room, and it's all very, Black Hawk Down, it's about the guy next to you and all that sort of stuff. But I kind of get it if you're on the same team defending a teammate, but does it really count as honourable if you bring in someone from the AHL affiliate to hit the person in the face that you feel wronged by? As we say here in Australia, nah. So to return to our case study, after Greer's earlier hit, Lightning coach John Cooper made a calculated move. He rested the skilled players and he called up muscle from Syracuse and let them, quasi-enforcers, do their job. Sabourin is a 30-year-old with 111 penalty minutes in the AHL the previous year, and he played just 19 seconds before earning a match penalty for flooring Aaron Ekblad. So let me flesh it out. His NHL presence has been sparse, totaling only 46 games across 4 seasons, which might indicate that his primary utility is tied to physical presence rather than sustained skill. I probably can't speak for that. I can only speak to his role in this particular game, which is, as I've mentioned, he was on the ice for a mere 19 seconds before being assessed a match penalty for levelling Florida defenseman Aaron Ekblad. This singular, dangerous action achieved the organisation's immediate tactical goal of setting a violent retaliatory tone. What is more disturbing for me is that it reveals the underlying concept of disposable strategic labor. He was called upon to execute a specific penalty-inducing task in less than 20 seconds, after which his immediate utility to the NHL club effectively ceased. In contrast, a player genuinely prioritised for development would require ample ice time to refine skills such as speed and hockey IQ. His minimal deployment duration indicates that he may have been used as an organisational weapon rather than as a developing asset. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like I said, I'm not actually a hockey person. Immediately after the incident, the Lightning swiftly sent Sabourin back to their AHL affiliate Syracuse on Monday. Although he received a 4-game suspension for his role, the rapid demotion shields the NHL team from long-term roster consequences associated with a low-skill player, while ensuring the immediate tactical need for violence was satisfied. This exposes a critical structural loophole. Because he was assigned to the AHL immediately, the commencement of his 4-game suspension is delayed. The player incurs the career punishment, the suspension record, and the loss of pay, but the NHL team avoids the immediate roster consequence of losing an active player for 4 games. By utilising a low-value asset parked in the AHL, the team fulfills its tactical goal, accepting a temporary financial fine and immediately reclaiming its NHL roster flexibility by moving the player off the books, transferring the inconvenience of the suspension to the player at the AHL level. At the club level, the NHL Department of Player Safety fined Tampa Bay $100,000 and the coach Cooper $25,000, acknowledging the premeditated nature of the violence. But this is a drop in the ocean financially. It's kind of like when people make the decision to take a parking ticket rather than try to pay for parking. Like, they think it probably outweighs it. They obviously saw the perceived benefit of delivering immediate retaliation and protecting their expensive NHL regulars outweigh the regulatory fine. This calculated trade-off reveals a management strategy that prioritizes short-term tactical enforcement over strict compliance with league standards. Interestingly, there are so many people trying to claim that the NHL is corrupt and they went soft on Florida because of connections with the team. But no one is talking about the ethical defensibility of using AHL players to be your hit squad. The club gets to sail on with no damage whatsoever, but the player has a permanent stain not only on his formal record, but on his reputation. I'll talk about that in a moment. So let's move on to the idea of systemic abuse, vulnerability, and career consequences. I've already mentioned that using AHL players as enforcers raises serious ethical concerns. These players already sit at the bottom of the professional hierarchy, where power and money are concentrated in the NHL's hands. I want to talk about the power imbalance and contractual coercion. In terms of financial precarity, the foundation of the power imbalance rests on the severe financial disparity between the two leagues. A rookie NHL player can make $925,000 in their first 3 years and up to, I believe, $2 million in bonuses. AHL players typically earn modest salaries, ranging between $40,000 to $90,000 a year. This economic reality places immense pressure on AHL players to comply with any instruction that could secure an opportunity, however brief, in the NHL. I'll put it a different way. When an NHL team sends the affiliate AHL player out to fight for them in an NHL game, they're asking someone with limited means to risk their health to protect multimillion-dollar assets, i.e., the more highly paid players. How is this possible? There's a whole bunch of tools. Contractual control. The foundation of the control mechanism lies in the contract structure. Two-way contracts give the NHL team complete authority over the player's assignment. They can be recalled, demoted, or benched at will. Players on a two-way NHL contract are primarily obligated to the NHL team. That maintains control over their assignment to the affiliate. The NHL team is financially responsible for the player's salary, and the contractual obligation ensures that a player retained by the NHL organisation, regardless of whether they're a prospect or a veteran specialist, must report wherever they are directed. This leads into the coercion element. If you're an AHL player dying to get back or onto the NHL roster for the first time or any time, you can imagine that when that call comes up, you're up, the player is not going to be able to say no. To refuse risks being labelled soft, uncoachable, or disloyal, killing any future NHL chance. Put it a different way. When the players from the AHL team were called up for this NHL game, what do you think they were told? Do you think they were told that they were there to develop, score goals, learn how to be a better person? Nope. I'll bet they were given a speech that this is a battle and they have one job to do. I don't know whether or not this happened for a fact. I wasn't there. But I can only imagine that the messaging was pretty clear about what their job was. Even if there isn't an abuse of organisational power, I can certainly say that I do not believe that the AHL players in question have a lot of bargaining power in this particular position. Now I want to talk about the tragedy of the typecast enforcer. As I've mentioned, enforcers don't officially exist anymore, for all the reasons that I've already discussed. Thus, there exists a fundamental paradox for players aspiring to reach the NHL through physicality. Although coaches may explicitly pressure prospects in the AHL to fight, the art of excelling only in fighting actually ultimately restricts the long-term viability of a player. Because the modern NHL demands multi-skilled players, if you excel purely in enforcement, this reinforces the organisational perception that the player is suitable for nothing else, and they're going to hit a career ceiling. In other words, excelling in violence can only destroy a career. Being good at fighting doesn't actually earn you more NHL time. It's more likely to brand you as a one-trick player. It's a very vicious loop, though. You fight to get noticed, you fight to stay relevant, you fight to get a chance. But every fight just reinforces the idea that you can't actually play because you're not skilled enough. If you call up an affiliate player like that for a 19-second shift and then you immediately send them back to the AHL, it's really clear that their usefulness is very situational. They're going to do their job. That's what it was. They probably won't be promoted and they'll probably languish in the parking lot indefinitely. As I mentioned above, the suspension loophole and structural exploitation, the Lightning exploited another loophole when Sabourin was suspended for 4 games. They sent him straight back to the AHL. And because that suspension only applies to NHL games, he could keep playing in the minors. But he won't be eligible for his next 4 NHL games. So that means that the team suffers no roster penalty, but he alone is going to be paying the price for what happened during that game. So the club sails on with its tactical goal, accepts a fine, which is money for jam, as we say here in Australia, and they get to return to business as usual. The AHL player is going to bear all of the consequences. The risk, potential injury, the unpaid suspension, the reputational damage, and possibly significant limitation of his career prospects. So in closing, this wasn't just about one ugly game. For me, it shone a light on how a system built for development can also be misused for disposable labour. The AHL call-up is both a dream and a trap. It's an invitation to a show that might end before the puck even drops. There's nothing honourable about this. No one here has the higher moral ground. None of them are heroes. It is gross. And I feel sorry for the AHL players. And quite frankly, I feel disgust for a system that perpetuates this kind of abuse. And if you ask me, why should anyone even care about this? Okay, let's talk this out. If you're an NHL player, you are so awesome, everyone loves you, you're like a god. Well, you should care, because AHL call-ups are often your teammates, your brothers in the same organisation. If hockey culture prides itself on the concept of family and loyalty, then exploiting those same players who are sometimes your brothers and treating them as dispensable muscle undermines that entire ethos. Even if you're a selfish turd, from a purely self-interested standpoint, you should still care. Today, you might be the established NHL regular with all your endorsements and everybody loves you and thinks you walk on water. But tomorrow, one injury, trade, or bad season could send you down. The AHL isn't some distant world. It is the next locker room over for you guys. If the system treats those players like crap and as expendable, what makes you think it will be any different for you when it's you in that position? As for me, why do I even care? I only have a very surface level, shallow enjoyment and interest in hockey. I enjoy watching it. Sorry, it's called ice hockey because in Australia, if you just say hockey, you mean field hockey. So I like the speed, I really like the skill, the teamwork, and I even enjoy the physicality when it's part of the game and not just part of the spectacle. Because if I wanted to watch two people just beat the crap out of one another, I'd probably just watch boxing or MMA, which I don't. Hockey is not supposed to be a gladiator sport. It's supposed to be about precision, creativity, and competition, where sometimes, as an outlet, they have a fight. So I can tolerate a fight breaking out naturally in the heat of play. I can even tolerate spur of the moment retaliation for a perceived wrong. But I simply cannot stomach the idea that organised violence is being dressed up as honour, while a system enables the structured exploitation of a class of players who really have no real power to say no. I'm sorry, that sucks.